Andrew McCart, iFLTV, and you already know I'm always excited, delighted to be joined by Mr. Dan Rafael himself. Dan, like I said to you at the end of our last interview, I said there's not much happening in terms of fight weeks, but I guarantee something will pop up in this crazy boxing world. And it just seems like with the LA press conference for that Times Square fight, all the hoopla behind that, and then obviously the big news of the tail end of last week was Turki Alalshikh teaming up with Dana White, the TKO Promotions, to form this boxing league. And I think I want to start there. Like I always do, I'm going to get you to summarize your thoughts on it, and then we'll break it down. So talk to me.
Well, I mean, everybody's been, I think, sort of hung up on the word league. It's really just another promotion company. I mean, they're going to do things the way they want to do it, but in essence, it's a promotion company the same way Top Rank is, or Matchroom Boxing, Queensberry, Golden Boy, TGB slash PBC. I mean, whatever you want to call it. I mean, they're going to be. They say they're going to promote fights, promote events, sign fighters, and do that sort of stuff. Now, there's differences what they are planning that is maybe a little different than what folks in boxing are used to, which is this is what Dana says. He said this to any number of people when they rolled it out and did a lot of media, including I had a half an hour interview with Dana that's on our podcast where we spoke about this. He made it very clear. Look, I don't want to work with other promoters. Okay, their prerogative. We're not going to use sanctioning body titles. Also, their prerogative. We're not looking to work with those people, to work with those belts and all that. We're going to do our own thing. We're going to use less weight classes than the ones that are traditional in boxing. You know, even though, in my opinion, I do agree with Dane on this that there are too many, but nonetheless, they're going to do whatever they're going to do in terms of the weight classes. And so, there's been so many people, Andrew, that I have talked to or heard from since this rollout happened, which was not unexpected, by the way. We've all sort of been waiting for the shoe to drop. It wasn't a matter of if; it was just sort of when. That people are like all worried and they're going to do this and it's bad for this and it's it'll be okay for that, but it's terrible for this. I'm like, well, first of all, let's see what they do. Let's give them a chance. Number one, maybe they can make it better. I mean, they're smart people. Dana has done obviously a good job promoting UFC. People have their opinions about him, but they've made their product a big deal. And boxing could take a lesson from that, in my opinion. But even if there are things that you don't like about it, they can't like just come in and magically snap their fingers and take over the sport. They can certainly run their business the way they want to run it, but that doesn't mean that because they're not going to use belts and they're not going to use the rankings or they're not going to use anything to do with the sanctioning bodies or less weight classes and all that business. Is that going to have any impact on whether the established promoters, big and small, are going to still utilize those particular things? The answer is no. To me, competition is good. Let's see what they can do.
Dev, what I've not heard Dana White say that he doesn't want to work with other promoters. So before
he said that flat out. He said that flat out.
So before I pick up on that, that's on your podcast.
Absolutely.
And where can people find that podcast?
Oh, I mean, any of your podcast platforms, your Spotify and Spreaker and you name it. Any Apple. It's the Big Fight Weekend Big Fight Preview Weekend Preview podcast and the Fight Freaks Unite podcast. It ran within the context of the full show that we did one of the shows we did last week, but we'll have it out. I don't know when this video is going to go up, but in the next few hours or day, it'll go up as its own standalone. It's like a 28-minute interview, and we covered a ton of ground on it. And Dana was very specific. He's like, look, we're not going to work with these organizations. He's like, we're not going to work with the other promoters. He goes, there's promoters I like and promoters I don't like, and I presume that's going to stay the same, but that doesn't mean I'm going to work with them. I don't know if that's necessarily the best way to approach things. I mean, I think, when you work with other people that can benefit everybody, it's helpful. I don't think there's reason to have animosity, but if their end goal is to, take over the sport, I get it. But there's been plenty of people that have tried to take over boxing. It hasn't really worked out for them. Now, they're different from the standpoint that they're well-funded, obviously, thanks to the money from Saudi Arabia. And they have people who are already powerful within combat sports like Dana White and Turki because of what he's been doing within boxing. So, I'm not freaking out about it like a lot of people are. I'm sort of like, okay, show me what you got. Show me show me your events. Show me who you're going to sign, what you're going to do. And once you get rolling, then I can make a fairer assessment of how you've conducted yourself, what type of events you put on. I mean, listen, Andrew, at the end of the day, the main thing that's going to make or break it is, do they put on the kind of events that consumers want to watch and pay for? that's the end. That's what they got to do. And if they do that, applaud. That means they're putting on events that we want to see. If they don't, then they will quickly be gone.
What interests me is obviously, like we've said this on numerous occasions, that boxing's been around for 150 plus years, right? So the WBC's been around since 1960 something, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So there's history there. That history.
The WBA, by the way, even older than the
even
WBC.
Older. Exactly. So they can't wipe out that history, and a lot of fighters they appreciate that green belt. You talk to a lot of fighters to this day and age, they say they want that green and gold belt. So the history behind the sanctioning bodies is there. So that UFC model, because it is like the UFC model that Dana and Turkey are talking about, do you see that working alongside boxing with the sanctioning bodies and the UFC model? Would that be two separate sort of sports?
Here's the thing about it. The issue is, and at least in the United States, now they plan to be international. Dana said to me they're going to do events, around the world, just sort of like UFC. They do the bulk of their business here in the United States, but they obviously have done plenty of events in the Middle East. They've done fights in Asia, in South America. They've been all over the place. And I think with their boxing, the most of the events will probably take place here in the United States. But yeah, of course they'll try to look to go elsewhere. If you're doing boxing promotion in the United States, unlike MMA, because they've got good lobbyists that work for UFC, and in the other boxing promotions didn't spend a ton of money on lobbying, that boxing in the United States is regulated to some degree by the Muhammad Ali Federal Reform Act. Now, it doesn't have necessarily a lot of teeth to it, but it still has proven to be effective at times when there's been litigation. It's rare, but it does happen, where promoters are bound by certain things that they can't do. Like in the United States, you can't be a manager and a promoter because of the fiduciary duty that a manager would have to the boxer, whereas the promoter does not have a fiduciary duty to the fighter, and things along those lines. And one of the things you can't do under the Muhammad Ali Federal Reform Act is you cannot, as a promoter, also be a sanctioning body, meaning have your own rankings, your own titles. That's against the law. Now, if they got that law repealed, I guess then it would be open season. And as everybody knows, Dana White has a very close relationship with the President of the United States. So that may be, there may be a movement that the Congress here in the United States would repeal that law. But until that happens, they're bound like that. And that was another comment that Dana made to me on the interview, because I asked about that. I said, when you're promoting in UFC and MMA events, there are differences between promoting a boxing event and an MMA event. And on the business side of things, one of the aspects is that you're not bound by the Ali Act. Now, another aspect of the Ali Act is you have to disclose to the fighter, usually the main event fighters, of what your overall money is. What are you getting from the television networks? So they believe they're getting fair amount of what they're, in other words, if you're getting $1 million from a TV network and you're paying the fighter 10 grand, that's a problem. So that's a way for their people to have a better transparency of what the money is involved in the event. It's not a perfect situation, but it's better than nothing. And so in UFC, they're not bound by that. Within boxing, they are bound by that. And he made the point, look, we're going to have to deal with that. We're going to have to figure it out. So he understands. These are not stupid people. They are intelligent. They've run businesses. So there will be growing pains, I believe. And again, I'm not rooting against them like a lot of people in the business are, because I'm going to hold my fire and I'm going to wait to see what they do. If they do a great job, I'll applaud, be the first one. If they fuck it up, I'm going to say so. I mean, it is what it is.
Definitely. And what intrigues me is obviously the Ring magazine is starting to put on shows, and I want people to go and watch your podcast. So I don't want you to literally tell me what Dana White said about, but obviously Riyadh season, the Ring magazine events. We've got the Times Square one. We've got the Conor Benn and Chris Eubank one here in the UK. Do you feel like the Ring magazine events are still going to happen under the Turki Alalshikh and Saudi Arabia? Is that, did he sort of like elaborate a little bit on that?
We didn't talk about that aspect of it, but I mean, first of all, lots of people are involved in multiple businesses. And when Turki Alalshikh bought the Ring magazine from Oscar De La Hoya, it became his thing. It's like if you go to the store and you buy, a pair of sneakers. I mean, it's yours. You can wear them. You can show them off. You can throw them in the garbage. It's up to you to do whatever you want.
Yep.
So if you are Turki and you spent reportedly $10 million to buy that entity from Oscar De La Hoya, you want to now try to make that work for you. You want to establish your brand at a bigger level. I mean, the Ring is obviously a very well-known brand within boxing. It's been around for over 100 years, and it has been an important part of boxing history. And so he's using it to, branding some of these events with the Ring magazine title and making them a part of the promotion. And again, my perspective is if you're a magazine, you're a journalistic entity. I don't know if you should necessarily be involved in promoting fights. But again, that's my thought. He owns it. He can do whatever he wants. So, yeah, I mean, I would suspect he didn't just buy it to not use it or to not make it work for him. So, yeah, I figured they'll probably still do some of those types of events. I don't think that it's going to be exclusive to TKO and whatever the entity that Dana is involved with. Remember, the Saudi investment fund or Sela, they're spending the money to fund this new promotion. They're going to pay the TKO people, which is going to be fronted by Dana and also involving of a man named Nick Khan, who was the president of the WWE. They're going to spend $10 million annually as their fee to manage and promote and put on these events. But the Saudis are going to fund those events. They're going to be the ones that are paying the bills. So, he can spend the money however he wants. If he wants to do it on a Ring Magazine event, or he wants to make the Ring Magazine, part of a TKO promotion, or whatever they're going to call the thing, I guess that's up to them.
Well, when this first got sort of like the news dropped, and I was getting a lot of messages saying Eddie Hearn, Frank Warren, Al Heyman, Oscar De La Hoya, Ben Shalom, Bob Arum, they're done with.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, obviously this.
What makes them done? Because a new promotional entity is being created and is not even planning to do its first event for a while, and suddenly they're going to just disappear. You don't think that Bob Arum and his team and even Oscar over the last 20 some years, and certainly Matchroom, going back before Eddie with his father, or any of these people, they've never had competition. What's wrong with competition?
Yeah,
raises everybody's game, forces them to raise their game.
Yeah, I think it was more so the format of it, and when they came in, it was like, obviously with Dana saying, obviously with now he's saying he's not going to work with other promoters, and obviously Eddie and Frank Warren have had a great relationship with Turkey with the Riyadh seasons and stuff like that.
But Andrew, they spent the last 20 years not doing business with each other.
That is very true, Dan.
I mean, listen, when I came into the sports writing of covering boxing in 2000, it was like rare. The power brokers at that time were still Bob and Don King.
Mm.
It was only once in a blue moon did they work together. Very rarely was there a top rank event that involved a Don King fighter and vice versa. Once in a while. There was a couple of big fights they did. Obviously, this was just before my time starting. They did do Tito Trinidad against Oscar De La Hoya because it was beneficial for everybody. They made gargantuan amounts of money, the fighters and the promoters. But that was a rarity. You had to then fast forward. I don't remember. I can't say there was not another one, but finally they did. Eventually they did Floyd Mayweather against Zab Judah together. That was like a pretty big deal. But you could count on one hand. So I'm not going to make it out like because Dana and the TKO people say we're not going to work with other promoters, that's never happened in boxing. I mean, I wrote about this for years when they had the so-called Cold War, and Top Rank had a ton of great fighters, and Golden Boy had a ton of great fighters, and they were in a big legal battle over the contract of Manny Pacquiao, and they would not do business with each other, and there was multiple lawsuits back and forth. And at that time, there was a whole slew of big fights that could theoretically have happened between their fighters, and they wouldn't make those fights, and the people were going crazy. Now, finally, they settled the lawsuit and ultimately saw a series of fights, including fights like, Mayweather against any number of fighters that were involved in those fights that they were able to finally do. They did Ricky Hatton against Manny Pacquiao, for example. That was a fight that was being prevented because of the nonsense of their lawsuit. So, people forget that this shit's happened before, and by the way, they don't, as I said to Dana, I mean, you don't have a name of your company. You don't have a broadcast partner just yet. They're still working on that. They don't have a single boxer under contract. And, all you've done is make an announcement. Now, people perked up and were like, oh, this is important because of the people involved. If Turki Alalshikh is putting his money behind Dana White and Nick Khan and WWE and UFC and TKO and Ari Emanuel and all the people involved, you got to pay attention because these are smart, experienced business people, and certainly people that know the entertainment business and the combat sports business, about doing an arena, about selling tickets, about broadcasting, about production. So that's a significant thing. But as he said, Dana, we know we're kind of putting the cart before the horse because we got a lot of shit to do. We got to ramp up. We got to build out. We got to get logistics people. We got to get matchmakers. We got to sign fighters. We got to get our broadcast thing done. His point was, I can't even tell you like the number of events we want to do in a year because we're going to have to tailor that to what the needs are of whatever media partner that we end up going with. So I think everybody's got to just take a deep breath and not think that it's, which I never quite understood, that suddenly this is the end of the world of boxing. Okay, fine. So there's a new player coming in. They're armed with a ton of money. take their best shot. And if they're successful, I think it's good for us as fans. If they're not, we're not going to know it because we're not going to miss them because they hadn't been established. And in the meantime, companies that have done big time fights for decades, whether it's Queensberry, Matchroom, Golden Boy, Top Rank, PBC, you name it, they'll continue to do their thing. Do you think that companies overseas that they may not be as big as some of the companies I just mentioned, but let's take, for example, Zanfer Promotions in Mexico, or Mr. Honda and Tekken Promotions in Japan, or pick any promoter out there that does fights at a certain level. What's going on with TKO in the United States is not going to impact their business in far-flung places around the world, who are going to continue to sign fighters, who are going to continue to do business with sanctioning bodies, who are going to continue to put on fights in whatever weight classes exist that contest titles in. I mean, I understand that there's the fear of the unknown, but I'm not. I want to see what they do before I make an assessment. Is this good or is this bad?
I'm in the same boat. Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you. I was very intrigued and fascinated by it all because, like you said, when you've got Turki Alalshikh the last 18 months that he's been in the sport, I mean, look at the shows we've had. Then you've got Dana White. Look at the shows that UFC put on, and then obviously Nick Khan with the WWE. That's always a spectacle for the fans. So it definitely intrigues me, and it's like you said, they put the horse before the cart, and we need to slow down a wee bit. But like I'm guilty of it, Dan. I was one of them. Was like, oh, what's going to happen to Eddie Hearn? What's going to happen to Frank Warren? What's going to happen to all these promoters?
I'll say this, and I don't mean this in like a bad way. Like, who cares? You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not wishing bad on any promoters or anything like that. I'm just making the point that if the survival of the fittest in life, much less business. You know what I'm saying? In other words, if they put on a better product or something that the fans more gravitate to, or that the fighters gravitate towards that promotion to sign with and fight for, so be it. I mean, just because there's an established promoter doesn't entitle them to exist for eternity. There is a natural end to every business entity. And, I've seen plenty of companies come and go. Some unfortunate, some good, they're out of here. But, then if they're worried, then you know what? Eddie Hearn, you think Eddie Hearn's not going to work his ass off to keep things going for his own company? These are resourceful, intelligent people about their business. I'm not worried about them.
Definitely. And what intrigues me, again, is kind of like, we've seen crossover fights when Ngannou coming over to boxing, and then obviously I think Randy Couture fought James Toney at some point. Can you see more?
That was in the cage, though.
Yeah, that was in the cage. But what I'm trying to get at is here's like, obviously you got Dana White with boxing and obviously the UFC, more of a hybrid type thing.
I asked him about that.
Oh, did you? Okay, I don't want you to tell me what Dana White, because I really do want people to go see your podcast. But what's your views on it?
Well, I'm I guess biased because I heard what Dana had to say about it. It's
right,
not,
okay.
people can certainly go listen to the interview, but it's not like I'm keeping a secret here. I asked him, I said, if you are promoting fights under whatever new name you're going to have for this TKO boxing entity, and you also are running the UFC, and you've had plenty of UFC fighters that have wanted to try their hand at boxing, and there's always been sort of that back and forth and that tug and push and pull about whether you'd allow them to do that. And obviously it didn't work with them and Francis Ngannou, who ended up not re-signing a new contract and leaving. But it did work with Conor McGregor because Dana blessed that and became involved with that promotion when he fought Floyd Mayweather. Dana's perspective was, yeah, we're going to have a lot of guys that may want to do that, but his opinion was, I'll paraphrase, like maybe in a special circumstance, but we want to keep our boxing people doing their boxing, keep our MMA athletes, in the cage doing the MMA side of the sport. So he's not necessarily looking to, just because they're going to have a promotion company that is doing boxing events as well as the UFC, suddenly they're going to want to take some fighters from either sport who are interested in trying the other and suddenly make those kinds of fights. I think they'll keep them separate. Again,
but like the Mayweather McGregor, look at the size of that. And even
if there was a special circumstance that really meant something and was really, a gigantic event, then, obviously they may change their mind, because McGregor and Floyd is, by the way, the second largest grossing pay-per-view event in the history of pay-per-view. So that was a special circumstance. But some random champion from UFC that wants to try boxing is not necessarily on the same level. But, I guess they'll have to take each incident, each time that may come up, and have to take it on a case-by-case basis. But I wouldn't say that suddenly we're going to start seeing all these crossover fights between the MMA fighters that are in the UFC and whatever boxers they sign to this new entity.
Definitely. It's intriguing times because, like I said to you, I mean, the boxing game's changing like every week, it seems. And
I embrace the change. It
I
makes it
embrace it as
interesting.
well. I really do, because when it's like how long have we been talking about the sanctioning bodies, the WB Silver and the WBC, the WBA and regular, WBA Super, right? We've always said we want one division, one face, and now it seems like we're getting it with Turkey and Dana in 2026. So we've been asking for it.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that, because just because they're gonna try to have one guy and one face, whatever, that's ignoring all the different top fighters are going to be involved with other promotion companies. See, I've never been somebody that was for the eradication of the titles. My perspective was, number one, I'd like there to be fewer weight classes. I'm okay with that.
Yep.
And I've grown accustomed and used to having 4 sanctioning bodies. I don't love it. I mean, I grew up, I first watched boxing when there was 2 titles. Then when I became a little more into it, there was 3 with the IBF joined the fun. But I also understand, because it's a global sport and there's lots of people participating in this sport all around the world, the notion that you could somehow have a sport with only 1 title in each division is laughable. Look at all the stuff that's going on right now when you have a Bivol who's got 4 belts, and you got the tug and the pull of all the organizations who want mandatories. The WBC has ordered the mandatory against Benavides. Michael Eifert took a step aside to allow Better Biev and Bivol as the IBF mandatory. He's supposed to be next. In other words, if you just have the 1 title, guys are going to wait years and years for a title shot. I don't think the fans, if they understood what would happen, really would want to see just 1 title. You have their various titles, and hopefully the cream rises to the top and those champions fight each other. And obviously with Turkey's involvement more and more, we've seen that over the last, year and a half or so. But the idea that 1 title would suddenly be like the end all be all of greatness for boxing, I do not agree with that at all. Do I need 4? I don't think I need 4. But to me, and this may sound blasphemous to some, and I really don't give a shit, I'd rather have 4 than 1 right now, just based on the ability to have the top fighters fighting in meaningful fights.
Yeah, that undisputed always sounds nice, doesn't it? When you've got a champion versus a champion, it's always got a good feel.
What happens if a top fighter, and let's say there's 1 title in each weight class, and that, let's say, whoever random, the middleweight champ of the world, whoever that may be, and he fights once a year, and there's only 1 title, there'd be no activity in the division. The top guys would linger, not be able to get the meaningful fights. It would depress the interest from the fans. I mean, everything is about a happy medium. You don't need 1,000 titles, because if everybody has one, nobody has one. But you also need activity. You need events that are going to pique their interest, and the way you do that is partially because of the status of the world title involved, and that's important. And by the way, it also is a huge chip economically for the fighters. If you have a top guy and he's fighting just to fight, and he's a year and a half, 2 years away from a title shot, the amount of money that boxer makes is going to be a lot less than if he fights for a title. William Skull is the perfect example. Here's a guy completely unknown, other than maybe by his own family, who backs into an IBF 160-pound world title because he somehow got to a mandatory that he did not deserve. They stripped Canelo Alvarez because instead of fighting the unknown mandatory, he fought a fighter that was much more well-known, like Edgar Berlanga. He won the title, but he didn't have the IBF belt. Now he's looking for his next fight as they're building towards this Crawford fight. And William Skull has that belt. So because William Skull has that belt, Canelo's going to fight him. So he goes from fighting for probably shit money, 5 figures, maybe he might have touched $100,000. I doubt that. And now he's going to fight Canelo for millions of dollars. Why? One reason, because he's got the IBF belt. So if you are truly a person who wants the fighters to do well and make money, the notion that you think there should not be only but 1 title is absurd, because they would never make any money. So I don't hate on William Skull because he's making a lot of money. I hate on the IBF because they ranked him number 1. That was a preposterous and disgusting situation.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying. And like I said to you, but in intriguing times, fascinating times, exciting times in the world of boxing. And I do want to take a hard segue left and talk about that LA press conference for that Times Square fight. I mean, it's only 3 fights, but that press conference was, I wouldn't say wild, but you've got Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney, Teofimo, Arnold Barboza, Ramirez, and Rolly Romero. It's just like a melting pot of just craziness between these fighters. And I enjoyed the press conference. Don't get me wrong. It's like Teofimo Lopez has got honourable Bozo, but he's arguing with Ryan Garcia and Devin Haney and vice versa. It was just crazy. Just talk to me about that, please, Dan.
First of all, that was the second one, so they already seen each
Yeah,
other face to face the previous week when they did the kickoff in New York. So they already had kind of enough of each other from that one. Now you put them together again, and they're competitive. Juices were flowing, and they got their opponent that they need to fight on May 2nd, but they all want to fight each other. When Teofimo and Barboza were going back, Teofimo was talking about also wanting to fight, Ryan Garcia at some point, and him and Haney were going back and forth, and it was interesting. I mean, I again, we've talked about this in the past. I could have lived without the slap from Teofimo to Barboza. Barboza kind of deserved it though in a weird way, because he's the one that flipped Teofimo's cowboy hat off his face, and then there was some pushing and shoving, and he was kind of asking for Teofimo to lash out like that. So whatever, it happened. It was a big slap. But look, you got three fights where the favorite is clear: Garcia, Haney, and Teofimo. But it's not like they're fighting bums. You know what I mean? Jose Ramirez is a decorated amateur Olympian, a unified world champion as a pro. Maybe he's seen better days, but it's not like he didn't compete with Barboza when they fought in the last fight. That was a competitive fight. Barboza is coming off, his two biggest wins, but before that, last April, he fought Sean McComb, who most people thought he lost to. Teofimo has had his ups and downs. He's had big wins against Loma and against Josh Taylor, but there's been other fights where he looked pretty average and pedestrian, where he just didn't perform at a high level. My point is, these fights are, again, clear favorites, but it's not going to be a shock if somebody pulls the upset. And in the other two fights with Ryan Garcia taking on Rolly Romero, and then Devin Haney against Ramirez, they have two guys in front of them who are, again, solid professionals, even though they're going to be the favorites. But there's a lot that could go wrong, as you know this, because the whole idea here, and the fighters are aware of this, the two guys who are going to fight each other and the opponents, that if Ryan and Devin are the winners, they're going to have a rematch in a big fight this fall, that will take place in Riyadh. So you don't think that Rolly Romero and Jose Ramirez are very motivated to wreck those plans?
100%.
The one guy that was real chill about everything, pretty much, and didn't really have much to say to anybody negatively, is Jose Ramirez, because this is not his nature. He's not ever been a guy to get in somebody's face and trash talk. He's a real, low-key kind of respectful guy. And Romero was like the comedy act. He was acting like his goofy self. He doesn't really trash talk, but he was kind of funny about that. But, there was some intensity there when they did the face-off with Garcia. I think this is going to be a fun card. I mean, and it's each of these three fights obviously would have in previous times headlined their own show. I don't think I'm not kissing anybody's ass. That's just the reality. You know what I mean? You're going to have Devin Haney and Ryan Garcia and and Teofimo Lopez, they're main event fighters, and the guys they're fighting have also been in main event fights. So the fact that they're all three together on the same show in that wild setting of Times Square in New York City is just going to be quite the scene, it seems to me.
Definitely. And you said there's three clear favorites, but when you look at the three fights, who's our Garcia, Haney, and Teo? Who's got the toughest? Who's got the one that might be the biggest not the biggest upset, but who's got the one that's got the toughest fight where you look and go, that's not a gimme?
Yeah, I think without question that's the Teofimo Barboza fight. I mean, my opinion is that if Ryan Garcia is sound mentally and physically, he blasts out Rolly Romero in somewhat easy fashion. That's my opinion. Rolly proved me wrong. Good for him. In terms of Haney against Ramirez, there are a lot of questions about Haney because of what happened in the Ryan Garcia fight. Remember, they're both going to be coming off of, about a 13-month layoff, because neither one of them has fought since they had their fight against each other last April. And Haney obviously got knocked down 3 times and had all the stuff that happened with the drug testing. But, I don't know mentally where he's at. Physically, I guess he's fine. So we're going to see about that. The people will have questions where he is. But Ramirez, as I mentioned, still a very solid professional, but hasn't really looked particularly good in recent fights. And Haney's a master boxer. And so that, I think, is probably going to be a difficult fight for Ramirez. So, again, I think all three of the so-called opponents have a chance. But if your question was who's got the best chance, I think you could ask 50 fans and 50 media or whoever, 50 people in the business that all tell you that the guy with the best chance of the three is probably Barboza against Teofimo.
Yeah, I fingers crossed I can be out there in New York. I kind of would love to be out there and witness that Times Square. I don't understand how they're going to they do it if it's just tickets, or they're just going to let people walk by Times Square and watch
Well,
it?
I think it's my understanding is they can't have tickets for sale because of the logistics of where it's taking place. And so again, I don't know if this has been 100% announced or established. I am told there'll be an area where there'll be seating, I guess, for a few hundred fans on a first come first served basis, and then everybody else, I guess, if they're going to watch, will just be standing, kind of like if you ever seen Times Square on New Year's Eve. They've got the huge crowd, when they drop the ball at midnight and all that. And because Turkey has bought the time, I guess, on all of the billboards, those electronic billboards around Times Square. I mean, if you've never been to Times Square, it's quite the scene. I've obviously been there many times, but there's really no other place like it on earth in terms of the activity and the buzz and all the foot traffic and all the people. But there's those video boards all over the place. And if he's going to have all of those video boards, I believe that the whole point of that is to show the fights live to the crowd while they're taking place. So, who are standing there out in the open. So it's going to be a pretty interesting atmosphere for sure. I mean, I've covered outdoor fights in big stadiums and famous places, Wembley Stadium, Yankee Stadium, all kinds of places. Never even contemplated a fight card being outdoors, in Times Square, the heart of New York City.
I'm telling you what, like I said, fingers crossed I can be out there for it, because I'm really, really looking forward to it. Now, Dan, thank you so much for your time, as always. Now, if you want to go and watch that, when did you say that Dana White interview podcast is going to be out?
Well, it's already out. It just what we do is we do 2 podcasts a week, and this was on I forget which episode. It was we do a podcast every Thursday night and every Sunday night, and the full interview was within that 1 hour and 10-minute show. It takes about a half an hour of the show. But what we also do is we take that podcast a few days later. Should be, as we tape this on Tuesday, it should be out on its own as its own thing where you can just listen to the 30-minute segment. And again, you can find it on any of your major podcast platforms: Spreaker, Spotify, Apple, you name it, it's there.
Definitely. Well, listen, I'm going to put a link to your podcast like I always do in the description. So I'm going to be tuning in. I'm definitely going to be looking out for that interview to have a look at it, and everyone else should do as well. Dan, thank you so much for taking time out in my Tuesday evening, your Tuesday afternoon. I appreciate it as always. And like I said, no doubt there'll be something big that pops up somewhere in the next week or two, and I can get another chat with you, because I do enjoy our talks, mate. And I appreciate you. Thank you very much, Dan.
All right, Andrew, you bet.
Thanks, brother. Thank you.